Mark Warren woke up in the dark, first with the feeling that the world around him was already tensely waiting for him to wake up, and then with the insistent trill of his alarm clock. The sound penetrated his sleep like a thin beam of light through tightly closed curtains. He reached out, felt the familiar cold button on the case, and pressed it, plunging the room back into silence. Outside the window, the dawn was just breaking over Los Angeles, a city that never truly sleeps. Even at this hour, when the dark sky is just beginning to brighten, neon signs are already burning somewhere, taxis are rushing along deserted avenues, and trucks are honking on the outskirts, unloading boxes of food. A city of lights, contrasts, and endless stories, where wealth and poverty live side by side, and dreams are shattered as often as they come true. A faint, almost silvery light filtered through the thick gray curtains into the bedroom. It painted the walls and bed in cool tones, making everything around look like an old black and white photograph. Mark lay on his back, looking at the ceiling. For a few seconds, he simply listened to the silence, that special, thick silence before the start of a new day, when the world has not yet had time to pick up speed. Today, he had a difficult case, a heart valve replacement. The work required filigree precision, confidence in every movement, and total concentration. Usually on such mornings he felt nervous, as if about to go on stage. But not today. A collected silence reigned in his mind, like in the operating room before the first incision. Emily was sleeping peacefully on the wide bed next to him. Mark turned his head and let his gaze rest on her face for a moment. In the dim light of dawn, she seemed almost unreal, her skin pale and soft as porcelain, her long dark hair scattered across the pillow, casting a deep chocolate sheen. Thick eyelashes cast elegant shadows on her cheekbones, and the corners of her lips trembled slightly, as if she was about to say something in her sleep. Mark slowly reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face with his fingertips. Emily muttered something softly and buried herself deeper in the pillow, as if hiding from the light. He knew she needed sleep. Working all night was draining. Emily was a woman who strangely combined the lightness of the night and the solid strength of survival. During the day, she could seem fragile, almost ethereal, but on stage she turned into another person. At night, she worked as a burlesque dancer at the famous club Velvet Room on Hollywood Boulevard, a place where the smell of expensive perfume and cheap whiskey mixed, and the spotlight made any fantasy come true. There, in the semi-darkness and smoke of cigarettes, she shone, captivating the audience with every move. Her laughter, her plasticity, the ability to catch a glance, all this attracted people to her. Mark's world was different. During the day, he stood under white operating lights, in sterile air where every second could cost a life. There was no room for chance, only calculation, experience, and cold logic. He and Emily lived at different rhythms, as if in two parallel time zones. When he rose at dawn, pulling a freshly ironed white coat over his scrubs, she was just returning home, tired but still saturated with the smell of the stage, the glitter on her skin, and the music ringing in her head. Mark sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. His surgical gown lay on the chair next to the bed, and Emily's sparkling, rhinestone-embroidered gloves had been thrown down hastily. On the nightstand were medical books mixed with her theatrical makeup and perfume bottles. This strange mixture of morning and night, white and scarlet, seemed to him a living symbol of their family. Sometimes he joked that they lived like two ships that met only briefly in port. But deep down, he was proud of her talent. Not everyone is capable of going on stage in front of dozens of eyes and holding their attention with dance, maintaining dignity and ease. Mark loved to watch her from the audience when he had time. At such moments, he felt both admiration and slight jealousy. He stood up, trying not to make any noise. His uniform lay neatly on the chair, turquoise scrubs and a white coat. Emily had ironed them in the evening, despite her fatigue. This care always touched him. He dressed, leaned over, and kissed her forehead. "Sleep, darling," he whispered almost soundlessly. She didn't move, only the corners of her lips twitched in a weak smile. In the kitchen, the first thing Mark did was turn on the coffee maker. The house is filled with the aroma of freshly ground coffee. He glanced at his phone. 5 in the morning. A message flashed on the screen late at night. From Jason Phillips, his best friend and lawyer. Good luck on today's surgery, Doc. Let's meet after work. I want to tell you the news. Mark smiled at the corners of his lips. Jason always remembered important days. I wonder what the news was. Perhaps he won a difficult case. Or maybe he decided to get engaged to Sarah, whom he had been dating for several months. The coffee was ready. Mark poured himself a cup and went to the window. The city was gradually coming to life outside. An ambulance siren was blaring in the distance, and shop signs were turning on somewhere closer to the center. The air was cool, and the morning light painted the roofs of the houses a soft pink. He took a sip and felt the warmth spread through his body. His thoughts returned to the upcoming operation. Everything was ready: the team, the equipment, the patient. In the operating room, he could control every detail, unlike life outside it. He finished his coffee, washed the cup, and put it on the drying rack. He tiptoed back into the bedroom, picked up his phone and keys. Emily was still asleep, covered with a blanket. He paused in the doorway, looking at her. At that moment, she seemed like a symbol of home, peace, and quiet, and at the same time, something he didn't quite understand. In recent months, he had increasingly caught himself thinking that there was a subtle but noticeable distance between them. Not arguments, not coldness, more like silence where there used to be conversations. A day off, an evening, a beach in Malibu, he promised himself mentally. Mark closed the door behind him and took a deep breath of the morning air. The street was empty, except for a lone jogger with headphones running past. He got into the dark blue sedan and started the engine. The engine rumbled, and the headlights cut through the gloom. Before he pulled away, Mark glanced up at the bedroom windows. The curtains were closed. Sleep peacefully, he thought. The car rolled slowly down the street, leaving behind the house that was both a quiet haven and a mystery to him. A new day was beginning, and Mark did not yet know what shadows were preparing to darken this seemingly peaceful life. The day passed in bustle and triumph. Mark confidently performed a complex heart operation. His hands moved precisely and without error, as if guided by Providence itself. The patient, an elderly man with a rare valve pathology, came out of anesthesia in a stable condition. Colleagues congratulated Mark on his success, and he only nodded modestly, feeling relief and pride for the whole team inside. After several hours of intense work, satisfaction came. Another life saved, another confirmation that he was in the right place. Closer to lunch, having sent the report and changed from sterile scrubs into casual clothes, Mark decided to have a bite to eat in the hospital cafe. He hadn't even had time to take a couple of sips of cooling coffee when a familiar voice was heard behind him. "Here he is, the hero of the day," Jason said cheerfully, clapping Mark on the shoulder. Mark turned and smiled warmly at his best friend. Jason Phillips, a tall, dark-haired man with a confident demeanor, stood before him in a formal dark gray suit. The lawyer looked cheerful, although his eyes hid a slight weariness. Apparently, his night had been no less tense than Mark's morning. "Hey," Mark stood up for a friendly handshake that turned into a short hug. "Didn't expect to see you here in the middle of the workday. I have a client meeting nearby, finished early, and decided to drop by to congratulate you in person," Jason explained, sitting down across from Mark at a small table. "I heard from Sarah that you had a big operation planned today. How did it go?" Successfully, Mark sipped his coffee, feeling the pleasant warmth. "The patient will live. The team worked perfectly." "That's great news," Jason smiled genuinely, revealing a neat row of white teeth. "I had no doubt you could handle it. You're the best surgeon around." Mark waved his hand dismissively. "Stop it. It's just a regular job." "Ordinary, you say?" The friend chuckled. "For some it's ordinary, but for others it's ready to be carried in their arms to save their lives." Mark just smiled back. He always felt warmth from Jason's support. They had been friends for over a decade and had been through a lot together. Jason knew how to lighten the mood with a joke or just his optimism. "You wrote that there was news," Mark recalled, looking at his friend with interest. "Do you want to tell us now or tonight? We were planning to meet later." Jason glanced around conspiratorially, as if he were revealing a state secret, and leaned closer. Anyway, I did it. I asked Sarah to marry me. Mark's eyes widened, and he slapped his hand on the table with joy. Oh, come on. Congratulations, buddy. And what about her? She said yes, of course. Jason laughed, not hiding his pride. I did it last night, the classics. Ring, kneeling, champagne afterwards. This is news. Mark was genuinely happy for his friend. I'm very happy for you and Sarah. You are a wonderful couple. Thanks, Jason nodded. Just don't spread the word too much yet. Her parents don't know yet. We're planning to tell them in person this weekend. I understand, my mouth is locked. Mark made a gesture as if he were locking his lips with a key. We should celebrate the engagement tonight. What do you think? Definitely, Jason's eyes twinkled mischievously. By the way, I was thinking, maybe we could celebrate tonight at the Velvet Room. You haven't stopped by Emily's work in a while, and I'd be interested to see her in action. And at the same time, let's drink to my imminent family happiness. Mark raised his eyebrows in surprise. In the Velvet Room? Why not? It's been a while since I've seen her perform. Do you think she'll like the surprise? Of course she will, Jason answered confidently. Your support means a lot to her, and I admit I've never been to a burlesque club. Everything is interesting to see. Mark laughed. Well, get ready, it might be a bit hot there, but their shows are great, you won't regret it. The friends quickly agreed on a time, close to midnight, when Emily usually had her main gig. Jason was supposed to settle things and pick up Mark from his house in his car so they could go together. We'll have a drink while we're at it. I don't have to go anywhere tomorrow morning, Jason said, getting up from the table. And you, Doctor, can relax once, I hope. Mark nodded. Tomorrow is my day off, so everything came together perfectly. They said goodbye until the evening. Mark watched his friend leave. A warm feeling spread in his chest. Jason looked happy, and this made him happy. I'll have to tell Emily she'll be happy for Jason, Mark thought, heading towards the exit of the hospital. Mark felt a pleasant excitement for the rest of the day. The thought of seeing Emily on stage that evening and celebrating Jason's happy event lifted his spirits. He left the clinic early, citing fatigue from the operation, and returned home by sunset. Emily was already awake and taking a shower when Mark looked into the bedroom. Her stage clothes were laid out on the bed, a shimmering sequin corset dress the color of the night sky and lace stockings. Next to them lay a black satin mask decorated with rhinestones and high patent leather heels. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, admiring these attributes of her mysterious nightlife. At that moment, Emily emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy white towel. Her hair fell in dark strands over her shoulders, and individual drops of water glistened on her skin like tiny crystals. Seeing her husband, she broke into a smile, slightly lifting her chin. Hello, you're early today. Her voice rang like a small silver bell. Mark rose from the bed and stepped towards her to embrace her. He felt the warmth of her body and inhaled the familiar scent of shampoo light with a hint of jasmine. The operation was a success, and I'm free for the rest of the day, he explained, holding her tightly to him. I thought we were lucky to have some time together. Emily kissed him softly on the cheek, holding her lips there for a moment longer than usual. That's wonderful. I missed you. Me too, he replied, looking into her eyes. Very. She pulled away a little and began to dry her hair with a towel. Mark noticed a shadow of fatigue under her eyes and gently ran his finger along her cheek. Did you sleep well? Yes. She nodded, but there was a slight hoarseness in her voice. A couple of hours were possible. Yesterday was a long night, a lot of performances, and the audience was late. I see. He sat her down next to him on the bed and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were after the shower. I know. So I thought, I want to come see your show today. She raised her eyebrows in surprise, moving away slightly as if checking whether he was joking or not. Really? You're usually so tired after work. Today is a special occasion, Mark smiled. First, I have tomorrow off, and second, Jason has good news for us. He wants to celebrate with us. At the mention of Jason, Emily tensed slightly. Her shoulders rose slightly. Her gaze became more attentive, but the next second she hid it behind slight interest. "News?" she asked, pretending to be simply curious. "What kind of news?" "He'll tell me in person this evening. He suggested meeting me at the Velvet Room. You don't mind if we're in the room, do you? We'll show up as a surprise." Emily looked down at her hands, tugged nervously at the corner of her towel, then looked back at her husband. Her smile was a little strained, but he assumed it was because she was tired. "Of course, I don't mind. It's just." She hesitated, choosing her words. "I always get nervous when you watch my performances. I want to look perfect in front of you." "You're always perfect," Mark said seriously, gently turning her face towards him. "Even when you don't think so." She smiled slightly, but something else flashed in her eyes, either embarrassment or anxiety. "Sometimes I feel like I'm a completely different person on stage," she said quietly. "I don't know if you'll like this different." "I like you, any of you," he answered without hesitation. "I love watching you shine, and I don't care if it's burlesque or morning coffee in the kitchen." Emily pressed her forehead against his chest, lingering there longer than usual. "Thank you. You always know how to say the right words." "Because they're true," Mark said softly, stroking her back. "And," he pulled away slightly, "I was thinking, after the show, we could go somewhere, maybe to Malibu like before." "That sounds tempting," she smiled warmer. "But I have a rehearsal tomorrow. We'll see how it goes." "Okay, let's not make any predictions. I just want us to be together today." Emily took a deep breath, as if she wanted to say something but changed her mind. Then she lightly touched his lips with hers. "Okay? Then I need to get ready. You go to the kitchen, and I'll change. Okay? But I warn you, I'll make you some coffee, and you won't refuse it. If it's your signature one, with cinnamon," she laughed, "then maybe I won't refuse it." He smiled and, standing up, noticed how she, thinking that he had already turned away, nervously tucked the corner of the towel again. She rose quickly and began to dress. Mark watched for a moment as she tightened her corset with practiced skill, adjusted the lacing, then put on a thin silk robe over it so as not to stain her stage costume before she went on stage. Her movements were practiced, precise, like his own in the operating room. Each of them was a master of their craft, Mark thought with warm pride. An hour later, it was already dark, and Jason's car pulled up near their house. Mark, who had managed to change into casual jeans and a shirt, looked out the window. "Jason is here. Are you ready?" Emily stood in front of the mirror, applying the final touches of makeup, bright red lipstick, and eyeliner. In the reflection, her eyes met her husband's. "Yeah, almost." She lowered the mask onto her face, an accessory she wore for a couple of numbers, adding a touch of mystery to her look. Mark approached his wife from behind, admiring her. The mask covered the upper half of her face, leaving her lips and chin exposed. It looked magical and a little dangerous. "Incredibly beautiful," he whispered, sliding his hands down her waist. Emily adjusted a strand of her hair, which was neatly arranged in waves. "Thank you. We have to go. We can't keep the audience waiting," she joked, trying to hide her sudden nervousness behind a light tone. They went downstairs and out to the car. Jason leaned out of the driver's side window. "Good evening, the most beautiful dancer in Los Angeles," he announced, looking at Emily with a wide smile, then winked at Mark. "Have a seat, sir and senora. You are in for a show you will never forget." Emily laughed softly and settled into the back seat, trying not to wrinkle her suit. Mark sat down next to her, closing the door. The car started moving. The walk to Hollywood Boulevard took about half an hour. Soft music was playing in the salon, and the friends were chatting animatedly. Jason was telling funny stories from his legal practice, Mark was teasing him, and Emily was listening, occasionally inserting humorous remarks. At some point, it seemed to Mark that his wife was speaking a little tensely, as if her thoughts were occupied with something else. He wrote it off as the usual nervousness before a performance after all. Today, she would have loved ones in the audience. Finally, the neon sign for the Velvet Room flashed ahead. The establishment was housed in an old Art Deco building, with a narrow facade decorated with glowing letters and heavy velvet curtains at the entrance. A few people were already gathered on the sidewalk, waiting for security to let them in. Jason parked nearby. As soon as the car stopped, Emily slipped out. "I need to be backstage before the show starts," she said quickly, glancing at her watch. "Make yourself comfortable, I'll know you're in the audience." Mark kissed her goodbye. "Good luck, darling. We'll be rooting for you." Jason gallantly kissed Emily's hand. "Conquer them all, Em." Emily smiled weakly. "Thank you. See you after the performance." She hurried to the entrance, where a security guard immediately let her through the curtain. Mark and Jason followed in the general line. "She seems nervous, doesn't she?" Jason said quietly, leaning close to Mark's ear as they waited. "I haven't seen her this nervous very often." "It's just that I haven't been to one of her shows in a while," Mark replied, pride evident in his voice. "She wants to make an impression." Jason chuckled vaguely and looked away. A few minutes later, the friends found themselves inside the club. The Velvet Room greeted them with semi-darkness, interrupted by spotlights, retro music, and the hum of conversations. The hall was lined with tables with red velvet tablecloths, and cozy sofas lined the walls. A low stage platform, covered with heavy burgundy curtains, towered in front. Mark and Jason found a free table near the stage. Almost immediately, a waitress in a shiny corset and feathers in her hair approached them. "Good evening, gentlemen. What would you like to order?" Mark looked at Jason. "You promised to celebrate, so you'll give us some champagne?" Jason snapped his fingers. "A bottle of your best champagne, please, and 2 glasses." The waitress nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Mark looked around. The crowd in the club was varied. Young couples, groups of friends, several respectable men in expensive suits. The atmosphere was free, playful. Some were already sipping cocktails, some were laughing, talking, waiting for the program to start. "So, how was your first impression?" Mark asked Jason over the noise of the music. "Very much so," the friend grinned. "Original. I've never been to a place like this." He glanced around the room and suddenly stopped at something or someone. Mark followed his gaze and noticed a group nearby. A man of about 40 with an expensive watch and a well-groomed beard was hugging a young blonde around the waist. Clearly not his wife, a wedding ring sparkled on his ring finger, and the girl looked much younger and was dressed too revealingly for an official spouse. They were sitting close together, talking in their ears. Mark just chuckled to himself. Characters like that weren't uncommon at the club. He looked away, but Jason seemed to linger on the couple longer. A strange expression appeared on the lawyer's face, like dislike. "Is something wrong?" Mark asked, leaning closer. Jason blinked and shook his head. "No, I was just thinking." Before Mark could ask, the lights went out and the music died down. The crowd grew quiet in anticipation. The sound of drums rang out rhythmic, calling. The spotlights snatched the presenter from the darkness in a spectacular top hat and with a cane. "Welcome to the Velvet Room," he proclaimed, and the audience responded with applause. "Tonight you will have an unforgettable show, ladies and gentlemen. We will be transported to the era of jazz, glitter, and seduction." Mark felt a swell of pride inside him. His Emily was about to take the stage. He tightened his grip on the glass of champagne that the waitress had just brought him and glanced quickly at Jason. Jason, too, had straightened up, his attention focused on the stage. The music changed to a 1920s tune, cheerful and lively. The curtain trembled and parted, revealing a group of dancers in fringed and feathered dresses. Among them, in the center, was Emily in her dark blue corset and mask, shining brighter than anyone else. She moved gracefully, with the charm of a professional, smiling at the audience with her scarlet lips. The crowd burst into applause. Mark felt a lump in his throat. She was so beautiful and alien at the same time on stage, the whole hall at her feet. He clapped louder than anyone, although he tried to control himself. The dance was bold and elegant. Emily and the other girls performed complex steps in sync, throwing off their boa feathers, winking coquettishly at the audience. Towards the end of the number, Emily moved forward, remaining alone in a beam of light. The music became slower, languid. She removed her mask in a single movement, revealing her beautiful face to the audience and threw the accessory into the audience. Several men reached out to catch the souvenir. Mark heard Jason inhale sharply next to him. The mask flew past their table, landing somewhere behind them. Emily finished the dance with a dramatic split and a graceful backbend. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Mark jumped to his feet, clapping with genuine delight. He caught his breath with love and pride. He saw Emily meet his eyes for a second, or so it seemed in the bright lights, and smile, nodding slightly. The curtain closed. Mark sat back down, trying to calm his racing heart. He turned to Jason. "So, how do you like it?" But Jason was still looking at the stage, even after it disappeared behind the curtain. His face was tense, and there was a strange fire in his eyes. Only after a few seconds did he come to his senses and catch his breath. "She's incredible," he said hoarsely, draining his glass of champagne. Of course, Mark smiled contentedly. "I told you, you won't regret it." Jason put down his glass and nodded. "Yes, you're a lucky man, Mark." There was a note in his friend's words that Mark didn't immediately recognize. But then the next act began on stage other artists, a comic performance, and they were distracted. Mark was carried away by the action, and Jason was lost in his thoughts, periodically glancing at the curtain behind which Emily had disappeared, then at the same man with the blonde at the next table. A few numbers later, when the show was approaching intermission, Mark stood up. "I'll go find Emily backstage and congratulate her on a great performance." "I'm with you," Jason responded a little hastily, also getting up. The friends made their way to the side corridor leading behind the stage. Mark, as the artist's husband, knew the way, and the security let them through without asking any questions. Dancers were bustling about behind the scenes, makeup artists were touching up their makeup, and someone was changing for the next number. Emily stood by the mirror in the corner, sipping water from a bottle. When she saw her husband and friend, she smiled, although there was a hint of worry in her eyes. "Well, what do you think?" "Brilliant." Mark hugged her, not paying attention to the fact that she was sweating from the dance. "You were the best on stage." Emily laughed, pulling away. "You're flattering." "Not at all, ask him." Mark gestured for Jason to speak. Jason took a step forward, his smile looking a little strained. "That was amazing, Em." "I'm speechless." Emily nodded, looking down. "Thank you. I'm glad you liked it." Mark noticed that the jitters from the performance had not yet left her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set the bottle down on the table. He attributed this to adrenaline and the shortness of breath from the energetic dance. "Do you still have a number today?" he asked, stroking her shoulder. "Yes, the final act." "In about 20 minutes, she replied. "Then we won't interfere with your preparations," Mark decided. "We just wanted to support you." He leaned over and kissed Emily on the cheek. She smiled gratefully, but her gaze suddenly darted to Jason, as if she were afraid that he, too, would want to kiss her in front of her husband. Jason, however, kept his distance, although his gaze was almost devouring her. "We'll go back to the hall," Mark said, not noticing the exchange of glances. "See you after the show, okay?" "Yes, of course," Emily answered quickly. "After the finale, I'll change and join you." Mark left, leading Jason with him, who glanced back at Emily until she disappeared behind the group of girls. When they returned to their table, Jason let out a breath he'd been holding the entire conversation. "You know, I'll go outside for a minute and get some fresh air," he muttered, not looking at Mark. "Everything okay?" Mark was slightly surprised. "You're pale." "Everything is fine, don't worry. I just felt dizzy from the stuffiness," the friend assured and quickly headed for the exit. Mark followed his gaze, feeling slightly confused. Perhaps Jason wasn't used to such places and such a wealth of impressions. Deciding not to pay attention, Mark focused again on the stage, where the final act of the show with Emily was about to begin. It didn't occur to him what kind of whirlwind of emotions and thoughts were raging in the soul of his best friend right now. A few days had passed since that memorable evening at the Velvet Room. Life seemed to have returned to normal, but Mark noticed subtle changes. Emily had become a little absent-minded. When she thought her husband wasn't looking, her gaze would drift off into the distance, and her fingers would play nervously with her phone. However, when Mark noticed her, she would put on her usual smile and ask the usual questions. How had his day gone? Was he tired? Jason, too, was acting a little differently. He called less often and once canceled a planned dinner together, citing urgent matters. Mark didn't attach much importance to this. The lawyer's work is unpredictable, and wedding preparations were probably taking up time. But the alarm bell rang on the evening of the fourth day. Emily, who usually spent weekends at home or with Mark, suddenly announced that she needed to go to an unscheduled rehearsal of a new act. The manager asked, she explained, avoiding his gaze as she packed her suit bag. "We have a theme night coming up. We need to get ready." Mark was a little surprised. "Rehearsal on Thursday evening. Usually you have a day off before the Friday show." "I know," Emily answered too quickly. "But a new choreographer came in, and he's demanding. He decided that we could use an extra lesson." She spoke convincingly, but Mark still thought it was strange. Nevertheless, he kissed his wife and let her go, wishing her luck. "Shouldn't we expect you for dinner?" he asked as they parted. "No need, it might drag on until late," she replied, looking away. "I'll grab something to eat there." The door closed behind her, and Mark was left alone in the empty house. He found his heart beating faster than usual. Something was bothering him, but he didn't want to even formulate what it was in his mind. Instead, he decided to distract himself, cook dinner, watch an old movie he'd been putting off for a long time. An hour later, while chopping vegetables in the kitchen, Mark heard the beep of a messenger coming from the table. It was Emily's phone. She had forgotten it in her rush to rehearsal. Mark wiped his hands and glanced at the screen. Several notifications from the dancers' chat, probably discussing the details of the numbers. He was about to put the device down when a new message appeared, appearing on top of the others. Sender, Jason. Mark involuntarily read the text that popped up. "I miss you. I'm waiting for you, as we agreed. I love you." Mark's heart sank, then thumped dully and heavily. He read the short message over and over, hoping he was wrong. But the letters didn't disappear. "Love, waiting for you." His hands suddenly went cold. Mark felt a cold sweat run down his back. What was this all about? Why was Jason writing this to Emily? He unlocked the phone with trembling fingers. There was no password. Emily trusted her husband, or simply had not hidden anything until now. Opening the correspondence, Mark quickly ran his eyes over the previous messages. At first, nothing suspicious, a discussion of the evening at the club, a short good night. And then, from last night, "Jason, I can't stop thinking about you after that number." Emily, "We can't do this, Jason." Jason, "I know, but I can't help it. I want to see you." Emily, "I can't today. Mark is at home." Jason, "What about tomorrow? Sarah's going to visit her parents for 2 days." Emily, "I'll try to go out tomorrow under the pretext of a rehearsal." Jason, "I'll be waiting. 3 inches." Mark dropped the phone on the table as if he had burned himself. His legs gave way, and he sank into a chair. Each sentence he read sank into his consciousness, tearing his soul apart. Emily and Jason, his wife and his best friend. The correspondence left no doubt. Something had happened between them after that night at the club. Or perhaps it had continued, who knows, when they crossed that line. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. His chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. He tried to make sense of it. Jason had recently gotten engaged to Sarah, but he was actually pursuing Emily. Emily. She had resisted at first. "We can't do this," she had written. That meant she had feelings too, or at least temptation. And now she had gone to him. His hand spasmed, and Mark was surprised to find that he was clutching a kitchen knife. He must have been holding it while he was reading the messages. The sharp tip of the knife rested on the cutting board, trembling with the tension of his muscles. Mark slowly unclenched his fingers. The knife fell to the floor with a clatter. He had to make sure it was true. Part of him still hoped there was some misunderstanding, that he would call Jason or Emily now and everything would be explained. But the messages, "Love you, waiting." No, there was no other explanation. Mark grabbed his phone and hurried out of the house, not even putting on his jacket. The evening air hit his hot face. He practically jumped into the car and started the engine. One thing he knew for sure, there was no rehearsal. Emily headed toward Jason. He drove the car as if in a fog, like an automatic pilot, while his mind was rushing feverishly between rage, pain, and disbelief. Images popped into his head. Emily smiling at him in the morning, Jason shaking his hand, congratulating him on the success of the operation, the three of them laughing at a table in a club. Lies, lies, pounded in his temples. Everything was a lie. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to a familiar house where Jason lived. The parking lot in front of the apartment building was half empty. Mark immediately noticed Emily's maroon sedan, pulled up next to a street lamp. Recognizing his wife's car, he felt another stab of pain. Everything was confirmed. For a few moments, Mark just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, and then, gathering his courage, he climbed out of the car. He didn't know what he was going to do. Ask them to their faces, make a scene, leave unnoticed, preserving the last of his dignity. Not a single thought became clear. Having climbed up to the necessary floor by the stairs, the elevator was unbearably slow, and Mark couldn't wait. He stopped in front of the door of Jason's apartment. The door was slightly open, a narrow crack from which a dim light was shining. Mark's heart pounded so hard that it seemed the rumble was echoing in the entrance hall. He heard their voices. Emily's voice was quiet and excited. "I don't know, Jason. This is all so wrong." And Jason's voice, hot, pleading. "But you feel the same way, Em. I'm going crazy without you." Mark froze in place. He didn't want to peek, but his body wouldn't listen. He carefully peered through the crack. Jason's living room was lit only by a floor lamp in the corner. Two people were sitting on the couch. Emily was without her bright stage costume. Instead, she was wearing a casual dress that Mark recognized, and she looked young and vulnerable in it. Jason leaned toward her, holding her hands. "I made a mistake asking Sarah," he said, his voice shaking. "Damn, Emily, I probably always loved you. I just never admitted it to myself." Emily was crying. Mark could see the shine of tears on her cheeks. "But Mark is your friend and my husband," she whispered. "How could we let this happen?" "I tried to fight myself," Jason whispered passionately, touching her face with his palm. "I really did. But when I saw you on stage, I couldn't anymore. You're amazing. You're everything I ever dreamed of. With Mark, you said it yourself, you grew apart." Emily closed her eyes, and the tears started to flow harder. "It's my fault. I'm a terrible wife," she sobbed. Jason pulled her close, hugged her. She didn't pull away, dropping her face onto his shoulder. "Hush, hush," he said, stroking her hair. "You're not horrible. You're alive, real. Neither of us planned this." Mark felt the world spinning around him. Every word was like a knife to the heart. He had to break in now and stop this madness. But his legs were filled with lead. He couldn't move. At this time, Jason pulled Emily away slightly to look into her eyes. "Divorce him," he said suddenly, seriously and demandingly. "Be with me. We'll tell you everything, and I'll break off my engagement with Sarah too. Damn it, this engagement, I don't love her. Not like I love you." Emily shook her head in fear. "No, I can't do this. It will kill Mark. He doesn't know anything. He trusts me. He's done so much for me." "Do you want to continue lying to him?" Jason narrowed his eyes. "Meet in secret. You're already lying to him about the rehearsal. Do you think he won't suspect anything in time? Mark is not a fool." Mark smiled bitterly to himself. "No, he's not a fool. He already understood everything. but not a single muscle moved to give away his presence. Emily covered her face with her hands. "Lord, what should we do?" Jason gently removed his hands from her face and leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "Trust me, everything will be fine. The main thing is that we love each other." And he kissed her. Not a quick, stolen kiss, but slow, deep, desperate. Emily briefly tried to protest. Mark saw her palms press against Jason's chest, but then she gave in. Her hands slid to his neck, and she kissed him back. Mark's vision began to blur. There was a buzzing in his ears, and something in his chest had snapped. Nausea rose in his throat. He couldn't look at it anymore. He stepped back from the door, almost tripping over the rug in the hallway. His heart was pounding like crazy, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs that he didn't even realize he was crying. Without remembering himself, Mark turned and ran away down the stairs. He could barely see the road ahead of him through the filmy fog of tears and rage that clouded his vision. A scream was growing in his chest, a scream of pain, betrayal, helplessness, but not a sound was coming out. He ran out into the street, reached his car, and sank into the driver's seat, breathing heavily. His palms were shaking so much that the ignition key wouldn't go into the keyhole. Finally, the engine started, and Mark hit the gas without even fastening his seat belt. Was he running away from that house, from the horror of what he had seen? Or was he running from himself? He didn't know. Only one thought was pulsing in his temples. For what? How could they? Why? The night greeted him with black silence. The headlights picked out the road ahead, but Mark barely realized where he was heading. The tears dried, replaced by an icy numbness. Somewhere deep in his chest, this pain began to turn into something else, a tight, ringing thread that grew tighter with each passing second. Thread of fury. The car, driven by the driver's blind rage, flew onto the highway. Mark burned kilometers, not choosing a direction. His mind was boiling. The scene was still before his eyes. Emily in Jason's arms, their kiss, her tears. Every thought of them was unbearable, like a knife piercing his heart again and again. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel once, twice. There was no one around. The highway was almost deserted at this late hour. Mark screamed, finally letting his voice out. The scream came out hoarse. It felt like the night itself was squeezing his throat. The wheels squealed as they rounded the corner, nearly skidding the car. The jolt sobered him up just enough to realize this couldn't go on much longer. He slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road near a roadside motel. The engine stalled and ticked away as it cooled, and Mark sat with his forehead pressed against the steering wheel. It was as if his whole world had collapsed inside him. The love of his life had betrayed him. The man he considered a brother had stabbed him in the back. Why? Where had he missed it? Was he a bad husband? Was he too busy with work, not paying enough attention to Emily? Or was she just looking for a thrill? And Jason? Jason was going to marry Sarah. How could he start an affair with Emily at the same time? Memories that hadn't previously caused alarm floated into his head. Emily laughed at a joke Jason had made at a party. Jason adjusting the blanket around her shoulders on a chilly evening when the three of them had been on a picnic. Sweet, friendly gestures that now took on a different, nasty tone. They were probably laughing at me behind my back, Mark thought, and the thought sent a fresh pang of rage through him. He got out of the car, slamming the door so hard that the silence of the night shook. His shoulders were shaking, but his eyes were dry. The tears had run out, giving way to a burning anger. Mark took a few steps away and kicked a stone lying on the side of the road. It flew into the bushes. He wanted to break, to smash, as if by destroying something outside, he could calm the storm inside. Darkness spread around, only the occasional lights of the motel flickered in the distance. Mark ran his hands over his face. It seemed as if, along with the sweat, he was erasing his old life, his old self-trusting, loving, open. Something new was rising from the ashes. After a few minutes of fruitless anger, his breathing evened out a little. He couldn't sit here forever. And where would he go? The house was empty. He couldn't bear to go back there, knowing where Emily was and with whom. To the hospital, at night, with no one waiting for him there. To his friends, To whom? Jason was his only close friend. The others were just acquaintances, and he didn't want to flaunt his grief in front of them. Mark looked down at his hands. Surgical hands, giving life. And now he wanted to take life. The thought had horrified him at first, but it throbbed like a migraine. He imagined squeezing Jason's throat, looking into his betrayed eyes, making Emily feel the same pain he was feeling. The fantasy was so vivid that Mark trembled. "No, I'm not a monster," he tried to calm himself. But then a caustic thought came to him. And didn't they act monstrously? Suddenly, his memory helpfully threw up a forgotten episode from his youth. As a teenager, Mark returned from school early and found his father in tears in the kitchen. His mother had left him for another man, having written a short note. His father could not resist and punched the wall, breaking 2 fingers. Mark then carried him food and water for a long time while he drank heavily, cursing the unfaithful bitch. Mark then swore to himself that he would never allow anything like this to happen again in his life, that he would build a strong family based on trust. And so, history repeated itself like an evil mockery of fate. His own wife became unfaithful, like his mother once was. His best friend is the same family friend that his mother went to then, only the roles have changed. The bitter metallic taste of malice filled his mouth. Infidels. The word surfaced from somewhere in his distant memory, as if his father had spat it out again. "They are all infidels, traitors, destroyers of families," whispered an inner voice remarkably similar to the voice of his late father. Mark raised his head. The thought, timid at first, was gradually gaining strength. What had happened to him was not an isolated incident. There were plenty of Emilys and Jasons out there. Husbands cheated on their wives, wives cheated on their husbands, best friends betrayed each other, and everyone got away with it. It was always the faithful, the loving, the trusting who suffered. Was that fair? Maybe he couldn't change what happened to him that night. But why should those two continue to live peacefully? Why should other infidels continue to break hearts and destinies with impunity? Mark didn't notice how his hands stopped shaking. It was as if a cold steel of determination was flaring up inside him. The thought of physical violence, which he had tried to brush off a minute ago, now seemed logical, even necessary, almost a noble mission. They have no right to be happy, he thought of Emily and Jason, after what they've done. Images of possible revenge flashed before his eyes. Now he's bursting in on them with a gun. No, too merciful. Now he's slowly cutting Jason into pieces with a scalpel. Emily is screaming. No, too loud, they'll be found. What if? What if no one finds them? Mark felt a strange calm as the idea took hold. He was a surgeon who else could cut tissue quickly and cleanly. He knew how to cut an artery so a person would bleed to death in seconds. He knew where to strike to end a life almost silently. Almost automatically, he felt around in his pockets. In one of them was a folding knife. Mark carried it as a tool in case he needed to open a package or cut a bandage on the go. He had never thought of it as a weapon before, but now, holding it in his hand, he felt a strange satisfaction. There was laughter, both male and female, from somewhere nearby, from the direction of the motel. Mark shuddered and turned around. A couple appeared in the parking lot in front of the motel, illuminated by a single lantern. A man in an unbuttoned shirt leading a giggling young woman in a short dress by the elbow. They whispered about something, then the man pressed her against his car and kissed her greedily on the lips. The light of the lantern illuminated their figures. Mark saw a gold wedding ring flash on the man's hand. The wife of this type is probably at home right now, thinking that her husband is on a business trip or has stayed late at work. Meanwhile, he is pressing another woman and not even trying to take off the ring apparently. His conscience does not bother him. Unfaithful, the same as Emily, like Jason. Mark froze, watching the scene. The blood rushed to his temples again, but in a different way. He suddenly realized that he hated this stranger. He hated him almost as much as he hated Jason, to the point of his teeth aching. He wanted to pounce on him, hit him, wipe the grin off his satisfied face. The couple seemed oblivious to everyone around them. They had already opened the car door, and the woman was climbing in, laughing. "Hurry up before anyone sees, Bill." "Right now, baby," the man boomed, slapping her on the buttock. As he leaned in after her, Mark noticed a tattoo on the man's neck, the name Linda in glittering script. Probably his wife's name or ex-wife's. A pathetic irony. The car door slammed shut, and a dim light came on inside. The outlines of the bodies in the front seat merged. The man wasn't going anywhere. They were quite happy with the secluded corner of the parking lot. Mark felt his feet move forward toward that car. His fingers gripped the pocket knife until his knuckles turned white. He crept into the shadows, trying to stay out of the flashlight's beam. There was no clear thought in his head, only a hum. Punish, punish, punish. Through the windshield, he could see the man leaning on the woman, her head thrown back, her bare neck exposed. Both were engrossed in each other. The driver's door was not fully closed. Apparently, the locks on the old car were faulty, or they had forgotten to slam it all the way. Mark crept up as silently as his skills allowed. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were looking at himself from the outside. Now his hand reaches for the door handle. Now he smoothly opens the door. The creaking of metal was drowned out by the sound of a woman's moan. The man inside recoiled at the noise, but it was too late. Mark had acted faster than he realized. He yanked the man out, grabbing him by the collar of his shirt. He cursed. "Hey, what's wrong with you, bastard?" Mark's gaze caught his eyes, and fear and rage flashed in them. His broad face, with washed-out features, red from drink and excitement, was distorted with surprise. Mark didn't know this man, but at that moment it seemed to him that Jason was in front of him, that every liar husband, every traitor, was in front of him. Something was seething in his chest, breaking out in a menacing whisper. "For Linda," Mark hissed, looking straight at the ring on the stranger's hand. "What?" was all the man managed to say. Mark slid the blade of the knife under his lower ribs, knowing exactly where the liver was. The body jerked, the man wheezed. Hot blood gushed onto Mark's hands, onto his shirt. He pulled the knife out and stabbed him again, higher, straight into the heart. The blows were precise, honed by years of using a scalpel. The man jerked a couple of times and went limp, falling onto the side of the seat. The woman in the car finally screamed in horror, crawling toward the passenger door. Her eyes widened, and she huddled in the corner, awkwardly covering her chest with her hands. "Oh God, no! Help!" she screamed hysterically. Mark seemed not to hear her. He carefully laid the heavy body on the seat. Blood smelled of metal and heat, soaked the upholstery. The man wheezed the last of his life, his mouth wide open. The woman tried to open the passenger door, but in her panic, she pushed the wrong lever. Mark walked around the hood, moving automatically. Before he even realized what he was doing, he was on the other side of the car. He pulled the handle. The door did not budge. The woman locked herself in from the inside with a shaking hand. She was rushing around inside, trying to get over her dying lover and out. Mark hit the side window with the handle of his knife. It cracked loudly, and shards rained down. The woman screamed shrilly, trying to crawl back. Mark forced the now unlocked door open and yanked her out by her hair. She nearly fainted from the shock or the horror and fell to her knees, choking with sobs. "Don't kill. Please, don't. I didn't know he was married. I didn't know." Mark froze. The knife froze in midair. The woman raised her tear-stained face to him. The smeared mascara made it look pathetic. "Please, don't," she babbled. She looked young, early 20s, and now she was completely overcome with fear. This girl probably really didn't know anything about that guy's wife. Maybe he lied to her about being a bachelor. Mark suddenly realized that he didn't hate her, only cold indifference. He cursed under his breath and pushed the girl away. She collapsed on the asphalt and crawled away, not believing her salvation, still repeating, "No need." Mark didn't try to catch up. She was nobody in this story. He took a few steps back and looked around. His heart was pounding, adrenaline was seething in his veins. The air smelled of blood and urine. The man had probably wet himself in his death throes. He was no longer moving. his glassy eyes staring at the ceiling of the car. The night was quiet again. No one was around. No one ran out of the motel in response to the screams. Apparently, the rooms were far away or there were few guests. Only a siren howled far away. Perhaps someone heard the noise and called the police, or maybe not to them at all. Mark realized he was standing in the middle of the parking lot, covered in blood. He had to leave, and now, he wiped the knife on the dead man's shirt and slammed both doors of the car. The body in the driver's seat could have been sleeping if you didn't look closely. Picking up his knife, Mark quickly walked towards his car. The girl, sitting on the ground, was sobbing somewhere behind the cars, making no attempt to detain him. And who was she to him? Nothing. Mark started the engine and pulled out onto the highway as calmly as if he hadn't just committed murder. His hands weren't shaking anymore. On the contrary, a strange clarity washed over him. His first human heart had been stopped not on the operating table, but here, in the darkness. And instead of the usual guilt for a lost life, he felt satisfaction. The headlights cut through the darkness. Mark stared straight ahead, his bloodied fingers gripping the steering wheel. There was only one thought in his head, cold and hard. This is just the beginning. It was barely light when Mark pulled up to the medical center where he worked. The night sky had already begun to fade, and the hospital greeted him with the lights of its duty lamps. He parked at the back service entrance, away from the main entrances. The advantage of the early hour was that there were no patients or colleagues, just emergency room staff and security. Mark glanced at himself in the rearview mirror. His face was pale, with shadows under his eyes. A dried drop of blood was brown on the light skin of his neck, the victim's blood. His shirt and hands were much more dirty, but he had pulled on an old sports jacket from the trunk the night before on the way, so as not to attract attention. The jacket was also dirty, but it covered the most obvious. He took a pack of wet wipes from the glove compartment and quickly wiped his face and neck until the stains disappeared. Then he took a deep breath and got out of the car. He entered the basement through the back entrance without any problems. He was lucky the guard on duty was away somewhere or dozing. No one paid attention. Mark quickly walked along the empty corridors to the section where the staff locker rooms and laundry were located. The air was thick with the smell of laundry detergent and chlorine. A washing machine hummed in the distance. No one was around. Mark ducked into the men's surgical locker room and found his locker. His hands shook as he turned the combination lock, but the click gave him some control back. Inside the locker hung a clean set of hospital scrubs, a towel, and a spare pair of sneakers. Mark pulled off his bloody shirt, pants, and socks. He stuffed each item that had witnessed the night's carnage into a plastic surgical biohazard bag, the kind used to dispose of medical waste. He put his jacket in there, too. He had wiped the knife down with an alcohol wipe earlier in the parking lot and put it in his pocket. It had to go somewhere, too, but not here. Having stripped naked, Mark looked at his body. There were splashes of blood on his chest and forearms, dried in dark spots. He hurried to the shower in the locker room. Hot water gushed from the shower head, washing away someone else's blood into the drain. Mark mechanically scrubbed his skin, soaping himself vigorously until he was sure that there was no trace left. When he came out, wrapped in a towel, the mirror reflected a flawlessly clean man again. Only the look in the mirror was strangely empty. Mark did not linger to study his reflection. He quickly pulled on fresh light green scrubs, habitually fastened the laces on clean sneakers. The surgeon's clothes sat on him like armor, returning a sense of normality. He carried the bag of bloody things to the end of the corridor, where there was a container for contaminated material destined for incineration. Without thinking, Mark opened the heavy lid and shoved the bundle inside. There were already dirty bandages, used gloves. All of this would be sent to the crematorium furnace of the hospital incinerator closer to noon. His clothes would turn to ash long before anyone realized what had happened. When he was done, he washed his hands in the sink, carefully cleaning his nails. Then he finally allowed himself to stop and think. The night of chaos and horror was over. It was the morning of a new day, a day in which Mark Warren was already a murderer. But strangely, he didn't feel guilty or scared about what he had done. Rather, empty, and at the same time collected, as before a difficult operation. He took his phone out of his robe pocket, and Emily's phone. His wife had forgotten it in a hurry, which was a fatal mistake for both of them. Her smartphone screen was dark. Mark pressed the button for missed calls from Jason and several messages. The last ones were sent half an hour ago. Are you home? Are you okay? I'm worried, please answer. Apparently, Jason, not finding Emily at his place she probably left before the morning, decided to check if she got there okay and why she wasn't answering. Mark chuckled coldly. They were both probably worried right now. Emily about losing her phone and not knowing where her husband was, Jason about losing contact with her. But neither could guess the real reason. He opened their correspondence and methodically deleted all the messages from the last few days. Then he went into the messenger settings and turned off the option to show that messages were read in case Emily would compare later. Now put the phone back where it belonged, as if she had forgotten it at home and he hadn't noticed. Mark sat down on the bench, closing his eyes for a minute. He had to go home and play the role of the unsuspecting husband again. The thought of it made his temples ache. Smiling at Emily, touching her, listening to her voice after what he had seen, it seemed like a superhuman ordeal. But if he pretended to know, everything would fall apart, his revenge would be in jeopardy. No, he would have to pretend for the sake of it, at least for a while. He took a deep breath and let it out. It was okay, he could handle it. The steel inside him would not melt from pity or love the love they had killed that night. After tidying himself up, Mark left the hospital the same way he had come, unnoticed. The morning air was crisp, the sky peaky pink from the sunrise. The first cars of the day shift doctors appeared in the parking lot. Mark slid past them, heading for his own. He remembered the knife in his pocket, the same folding knife, stained with the blood of the infidel. Taking it out, Mark wrapped the blade in a napkin and hid it in the glove compartment. It was worth getting rid of the weapon quickly, but not here. The surveillance cameras could catch him throwing something in the trash. Better later, in a safe place. The house was quiet. Mark walked in, trying not to creak the door. It was almost 7 in the morning. He walked up the stairs to the second floor and stopped at the half-open bedroom door. He looked in. Emily was lying in bed, her hair spread out over the pillow. Was she asleep? It was hard to tell in the semi-darkness. He stood there for a second, listening to his heart. It suddenly skipped a beat in pain as soon as he saw her figure in their bed. So many morning images came to mind. She was sleeping soundly, and he was kissing her goodbye before work. It seemed like 100 years had passed since that life. Mark suppressed the lump in his throat. Now was not the time for weakness. He quietly placed his wife's smartphone on the nightstand at her side of the bed. She might think she'd left it there overnight. Then Emily moved. Mark jumped back towards the door, but it was too late. His wife turned on her side and opened her eyes. Mark. Her voice sounded uncertain. Is it you? He forced himself to walk inside as casually as possible. Sorry for waking you. Yes, I did. Emily sat up, throwing back the blanket. She was wearing his old t-shirt. She usually slept in it when her husband wasn't around. Her face was worried and tired. Did you go somewhere at night? I woke up you were gone. I was worried. Mark noticed that her eyes were red. It seemed she hadn't slept much either. Okay, he'll attribute his condition to that. Yes, he looked down, pretending to be slightly embarrassed. There was an emergency call from the clinic. Urgent surgery. I didn't have time to warn you. Oh, Emily slumped her shoulders, clearly breathing a sigh of relief, though there was a hint of disappointment in that relaxation. I see. I'm sorry it happened, he repeated, coming closer. I didn't mean to disturb you. Emily climbed out of bed, her bare feet stepping on the floor. Mark automatically noted some reddish spots on her neck, near her collarbone, not from his kisses, obviously. From Jason. The muscles on his jaw twitched, but he lowered his eyes, hiding a flash of anger. Emily timidly touched his hand. Everything is fine. I'm I also wanted to apologize for running off to rehearsals so suddenly yesterday. Work is work, he said dully, pulling his hand away. Not now. Just don't let her notice. She seemed not to notice anything, preoccupied with her own thoughts. Bowing her head, she asked quietly, "You're not angry?" Mark looked her straight in the eye for the first time. Angry? The word was so pathetic against the backdrop of the hurricane of feelings inside him. He forced a weak smile. "Why? I understand." Emily looked confused for a second, as if she had expected something different. Then she nodded. "Thank you." She looked down and suddenly noticed her phone on the nightstand. "Ah, here it is," she exclaimed, grabbing the device. "I was looking for it. I thought I lost it. Did you find it?" Mark shook his head. "No, I just saw it myself. She probably left it at home. I was afraid I dropped it somewhere," she muttered, unlocking the screen. Mark turned away, pretending to change out of his hospital scrubs so as not to meet her face when she checked her messages. There were a few tense seconds of silence. Was all Emily could say. "What is it?" he asked calmly, pulling on a fresh shirt. "Yes, Jason called last night," she replied. "He was probably worried that I didn't have a phone." "I see," Mark forced himself to say as casually as possible. "You tell him everything's okay." "Yes, right now," Emily muttered, already typing a message. Mark, dressed in casual home clothes, headed towards the door. "I think I'll take a shower. I feel exhausted after the night shift." "Of course, go ahead," she responded quickly. In the bathroom, closing the door behind him, Mark allowed himself to breathe deeply. The conversation passed without suspicion. Emily did not understand anything, even calmed down, deciding that she had scared herself in vain. Well, let him think. Turning on the water for show, Mark leaned his hands on the sink and closed his eyes. The image of yesterday's murder floated into his head like a surreal dream. Blood on his hands, a woman screaming, a man's dead gaze. He waited for remorse or horror at what he had done to come. But his soul was empty. Maybe it will come later. For now, nothing. He remembered that strange lightness after it was all over. As if by taking revenge on one unfaithful person, he had eased his own pain a little. Just a little. Jason and Emily were still breathing and walking, and God knew he wished he could. Mark's eyes snapped open, looking at his reflection. No, it wasn't time yet. Their turn would come, but later. First. First he would finish what he had started. This is just the beginning, he remembered thinking at night, and it was true. Something in him craved more. That new part, born from pain, demanded blood, not just the two of them, but everyone liked them. Like a predator who has tasted his prey, Mark was not satisfied. The world would not be fixed by killing an unfaithful husband alone. There were many of them. He looked at his reflection and saw more than just a deceived husband. He saw a judge and an executioner. Cold determination flashed in his eyes, not a shadow of a doubt. For several weeks, Mark lived as if in a bad dream, carefully maintaining the appearance of normality. During the day, he worked, operated on patients, communicated with colleagues, everything as before, at least outwardly. At home, he maintained polite communication with Emily, even feigning tenderness, although each kiss on the cheek was difficult. Emily seemed to sigh with relief, deciding that the crisis had passed, and the secret of her betrayal was still hidden. Jason also tried to behave as usual. He called Mark on business. A couple of times they even met for coffee. Mark, with cold fury, forced himself to talk, joke, as before, catching every detail. Jason mentioned that Sarah was gone for a short time. The engagement was not yet officially announced. Apparently, he was waiting for the right moment, probably hoping for Emily's decision. Neither Jason nor Emily knew that Mark was awake at night, that he stood in his office, staring at the wall where his wife slept, fighting the urge to strangle her right there in her bed. The only reason he didn't was because he had chosen a different path, a greater purpose. A plan was born gradually, a methodical purpose crystallizing out of the chaos of emotions. He struck first, striking down a strange, unfaithful man. News of the incident appeared briefly in the crime columns. Man's body found in motel parking lot. Young woman in shock nearby. Name withheld. Police investigating. Mark read the article with icy calm. No mention of the attacker. The woman had obviously had little to say, or the police were holding back on the details. It was mentioned, however, that the victim had an L carved into his body. Perhaps they had misinterpreted his whispers about Linda or interpreted the tattoo as a message. No cameras, no witnesses. Mark had chosen the location well. The police were leaning toward a jealousy-fueled showdown. Mark learned a lesson from that first action. He realized that he would not leave any obvious witnesses in the future, and that he needed to make his message clearer. That's how the idea of a mark was born, not a random letter, but a deliberate sign that the world should understand. He remembered Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel about the crimson letter A that a woman wore on her chest for the sin of adultery. The letter A comes from the English adulterer. This will be his brand of sinners. 3 weeks after the first execution, Mark felt it was time to strike again. He had already spotted a potential target. One evening, citing a long shift at home, Mark went not to the clinic, but to a bar at a luxury hotel in the city center. According to his observations, such places were favorite for secret meetings. Here, the cream of society allowed themselves secret sins under the cover of subdued lighting and expensive alcohol. The bar at the Orchid Plaza Hotel was elegant. A marble counter, soft jazz playing on the speakers, soft dimness. Mark sat in the corner, ordered a whiskey on the rocks, and waited, watching. He wore a nondescript dark jacket, his hair tucked under a baseball cap, a deliberately casual look that didn't attract attention. The hour changed to another. Visitors flocked to the bar. Mark carefully looked for a mark, among them a wedding ring on the hand, a flirtatious glance, excessive closeness with someone who was clearly not a spouse. And finally he noticed it. A woman of about 40 sat at the counter, well-groomed and striking. A strict business suit replaced by a cocktail dress with an open back, bright lipstick, a tall martini glass in her hand. A wedding ring clearly glittered on the ring finger of her left hand. A much younger man stood next to her, barely in his 20s, probably a new employee or just a ladies' man. He leaned toward her, touching her waist with his hand under the guise of a joke, whispering something in her ear. The woman laughed loudly in response and coquettishly patted his hand, but did not pull away. Between them, sparks of flirtation were visible to the naked eye. Mark watched the scene, pretending to read the news on his phone. Yes, a typical picture. Perhaps the wife of an influential person, bored in her marriage, and a young lover, either a subordinate or a casual acquaintance. She clearly knew what she was doing. The ring was not removed, which means she even liked this spicy risk. Unfaithful. Soon the couple moved away from the counter to the elevators, apparently intending to go up to their room. Mark immediately paid, leaving a tip, and, keeping his distance, followed them. His heart began to beat faster, but not from fear, from anticipation. He felt the predatory composure of a hunter. They waited for the elevator in the hotel's spacious lobby. Mark took up a position behind them, his face hidden in the shadow of his baseball cap. The man put his arm around the woman's waist. "So what floor are you staying on, Mrs. Harper?" he asked quietly, not embarrassed by the stranger, that is, Mark. "On the 10th, she sang, sliding her finger along his chin. "And I think we can dispense with formalities in the elevator, Tom." "As you say." "Liz," the young man smiled, and the woman coquettishly bit her lip. Mark clenched his fists in his pockets. Liz Harper, 10th floor, he remembered. The name might come in handy later. The name Linda from the tattoo on the man in the parking lot, Liz now a repeat of the letter L. But to Mark, they were all just labels of infidels. The elevator doors opened with a soft sound. The couple walked inside, still looking at each other hungrily. Mark followed. They didn't pay attention to him, too absorbed in the game of desires. The elevator went up. The numbers on the board slowly changed. 2, 3, 4. Mark stood silently at the door, slightly behind them. In the elevator mirror, he saw Mrs. Harper turn to her bow and slide her hand down his chest. "I hope you don't disappoint me, Tom," she purred. I'll try to exceed expectations." He grinned and couldn't resist touching her neck with his lips. She laughed quietly, closing her eyes. Mark looked at the ring on her hand, which she placed on the guy's shoulder. The gold band glittered in the cold light of the elevator. In his head pounded, "Unfaithful, traitor." On the 9th floor, the elevator suddenly jerked and stopped. The light flickered. All three swayed. The woman frowned. "What's happened?" The elevator was stuck between floors, possibly a technical failure. The man reached out to press the emergency button, but Mark, without saying a word, moved like lightning. A thin surgical scalpel, which he had prepared in advance, slid from the sleeve of his jacket into his palm. In one leap, Mark found himself at the couple and plunged the blade from below, right under the jaw of the young lover. He wheezed, tried to scream, but the blade pierced his tongue and the palatine artery, and dark blood gushed from his mouth. The woman screamed in horror. "What are you doing?" "No." Mark pulled out the scalpel. The guy fell, choking on his own blood, still alive, but already doomed. The cramped cabin filled with a smell of iron. The woman rushed to the elevator panel, pressed the alarm button with a trembling finger. A muffled signal came from the speaker. Someone on the line was asking what had happened. Mark, without panic, grabbed the woman by the hair and slammed her face against the wall. She gasped and sank. "Help!" she screamed toward the speaker. "We're being. Mark clamped his gloved hand over her mouth. He had pulled on thin surgical gloves in advance, bracing himself for blood. With his other hand, he coolly slit her throat with a scalpel in one precise motion. The blood that gushed out burned her fingers through the latex. The arteries had been cut cleanly, and she wheezed, weakening her resistance. The woman's eyes widened in shock and pain. She tried to press her hands to her throat, but the blood spurted through her fingers. Fall. A crackling sound came from the intercom. Apparently, a signal had been received at the security console. There was little time left, but Mark was ready. Supporting the woman's limp body, he carefully laid her down next to her lover, who was struggling in agony. Then, acting almost calmly, he made several quick cuts with a scalpel on her chest, tearing the fabric of her dress. Exposing the skin above her cleavage, Mark cut out a large letter A. Blood covered the symbol, making it difficult, but he managed to make the letter discernible. A adulteress, adulteress. The boy Tom still showed signs of life, twitching weakly and making gurgling sounds. His glassy eyes stared into space. Perhaps he still heard and understood. Mark leaned over to him, holding his head. "Don't encroach on what's not yours, boy," he whispered coldly. The scalpel slid one last time across the lover's throat, finishing what had been started. The body fell silent. There was silence in the elevator cabin, only the gurgling of the flowing blood. "Hello, what's going on with you?" The voice from the speaker became insistent. Mark tore off his baseball cap and threw it on the bloody floor, then quickly removed his bloody gloves, turned them inside out, and put them in his pocket. He straightened up and pressed the talk button with his elbow so as not to leave fingerprints. "Here, everything is fine," he said in a measured, calm voice, trying to imitate a woman's. "It's just. The woman felt ill, but has already woken up. We don't need help." "Are you sure?" the guard asked. "We've received an alarm signal." Yes, everything is fine. A mistake," Mark quickly answered in a high tone, hoping that the other side had not heard the earlier screams very well. "We accidentally touched the button, sorry." After he had pressed the end button, he took a small can of technical spray from his inside pocket, a prepared solvent. He sprayed it on the alarm button he had touched, and on several other buttons for good measure, washing away any traces that might remain. Then he stepped over two lifeless bodies and removed the hatch cover on the elevator ceiling. He had studied the plan beforehand. He knew that old hotels had emergency exit hatches. Pulling himself up, he climbed to the top of the cabin. The elevator shaft was dimly lit by emergency lights. At that moment, voices and noise were heard somewhere below. Probably the security decided to check personally, or they were trying to lower the elevator manually. Mark glanced at the shaft door at the level where the elevator stopped, somewhere between the 9th and 10th floors. A narrow crack was ajar. He moved over to it, hooked his fingers around the edges, and pushed the doors apart. It was hard, but they gave way enough for him to squeeze out onto the floor. He found himself in an empty corridor on the 10th floor. Quiet, no one guests, apparently, in their rooms or outside. Good luck. Mark silently closed the shaft doors behind him. Muffled cries came from the elevator below. The guards must have discovered a terrible scene inside. The alarm siren was now wailing at full volume, triggering the opening of the hatch. There was no time to waste. Mark ran down the carpeted corridor to the nearest staircase. He went down a few floors then, making sure that no one was there. He got off at one of the middle floors and got into another elevator leading to the parking lot. He had nothing suspicious in his hands. His clothes were only slightly splashed with a couple of drops. He had prudently put on a black turtleneck under his jacket. It was almost invisible on it. He had already hidden the scalpel in his inside pocket. Exiting the parking lot, Mark tore off his face, the previously unnoticeable half-mask, a regular medical one, which he wore, supposedly for COVID, an excellent trick, hiding the lower part of his face. He threw the mask into the trash can at the exit. The noise upstairs hadn't reached here yet. He calmly got into his car and drove out of the hotel parking lot, blending into the traffic on the street. Only after driving a couple of blocks did he allow himself to exhale. His heart was pounding, but satisfaction was spreading in his chest. He remembered the look in the woman's eyes a moment before his death, amazement, fear. As a traitor should feel, Mark thought gloomily. He knew that at the crime scene he had left a mark, the letter A, on the body of his unfaithful wife. Now the police would understand. This was not just a jealous husband. Perhaps for now they would be confused in their guesses, but soon they would put the pieces together. And then the city would shudder. A maniac punishing for betrayal was on the hunt. This thought did not frighten Mark. On the contrary, it inspired him. He felt like an instrument of higher justice. And not a drop of pity or doubt clouded his mind as he dissolved into the lights of the Los Angeles night, preparing for new chapters of his dark mission. A few days after the tragedy at the Orchid Plaza Hotel, all of Los Angeles was buzzing with the news. The morning papers came out with headlines, "Maniac punishes cheating spouses," and details of the horrific incident. Television channels showed reports. Correspondents against the backdrop of the luxurious hotel facade talked about a couple found brutally murdered in an elevator. The police confirmed the letter A was carved into the woman's body. Journalists, savoring the details, linked this case with a previous murder in the motel parking lot. There, according to leaks, the men also left a letter on the victim, initially taken for an L, possibly a poorly distinguishable A. 2 attacks with an interval of several weeks, in different parts of the city, but with a common detail, the mark A on the bodies. In both cases, the victims were married and were presumably caught in infidelity. A task force was formed at the police station. At a press conference, the official spokesman, Detective Riley, a gloomy man in his 50s, told reporters, "We are considering the possibility that this is the work of one criminal. Apparently, the killer is targeting people for certain behavior. We advise residents to be vigilant. We especially ask those who may feel like a potential target, according to his logic, to be careful." The euphemistic phrase that was uttered caused a disapproving murmur from the audience. Everyone understood who was being talked about. One of the reporters shouted, "You mean unfaithful spouses? He hunts for cheaters?" The detective clenched his jaw. "We will not accuse anyone specifically, but if someone leads a personal life associated with a risk of extramarital affairs, we strongly recommend that they temporarily refrain from going to motels and deserted places. I repeat, the criminal is extremely dangerous, acts cold-bloodedly and professionally." Another journalist asked, "Any guesses as to who the killer might be? Perhaps an abandoned spouse or a religious fanatic?" "We're working on a profile," Riley said evasively. "It's too early to draw conclusions." "Is it true that at the scene of the last crime, the maniac literally disappeared from the locked elevator?" they shouted from the audience. "No comment," the detective snapped. The press conference was broadcast on the main channels. Emily watched it at home, sitting on the couch in the living room, nervously fiddling with the hem of her blouse. On the table next to her lay the remote control, her phone, and a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. The screen showed a photo of the letter A carved into the victim's skin, of course. The image was blurred for censorship reasons, but the message was clear. Emily's heart was beating unevenly. She couldn't shake the feeling that the chilling breath of this story was somewhere nearby. She tried to convince herself that it had nothing to do with her. In such a huge city, so many betrayals every day, why am I even trying this on, she thought. But she couldn't do anything about the superstitious fear that was rolling over her. Snippets of yesterday's phone conversation with Jason floated into her head. "Have you seen the news?" he asked quietly over the phone. "Yeah, damn, this is not normal," she whispered, trying not to let Mark hear from the other room. "You know, I feel creeped out, Em," Jason admitted, "like it's a warning to us." "Stop it," she tried to smile, although he couldn't see her. "Nobody knows about us. It's a coincidence." "Of course, only 3 people know," he smiled bitterly. "You, me, and—" He didn't say the name, but Emily understood Sarah, Jason's fiancée, whom he had cheated on just like she had cheated on Mark. Sarah, however, was not up to it. She was on vacation out of town. "Maybe we should hold off on meeting for now," Emily suggested cautiously, "until they catch this psycho." "Do you think he'll come to us?" Jason's voice wavered. "No, no, of course. Just for peace of mind," she hastened to add. Jason agreed, and although the words homicidal maniac were not spoken out loud, they both understood each other. The fear that had settled between the lines of their conversation was all too real. Now, watching the TV screen, where experts were discussing the possible motives of the moralistic maniac, Emily felt sick. One of the guests in the studio, a psychologist, was saying, "Such criminals often act out of personal trauma. Perhaps the killer himself experienced betrayal and now projects his revenge on all sinners. In his mind, he is administering justice. This could be a middle-aged man, smart, methodical, with a profession that gives him skills in handling a knife." Emily changed the channel, unable to listen any longer. Mark's face appeared in her mind. A middle-aged man, intelligent, methodical. A chill ran down her spine. "No, stop," she snapped. How could she have thought that about her own husband for a moment? Mark wouldn't hurt a fly. He saved people every day. He didn't kill. And besides, he didn't even suspect anything. Right? The door slammed in the next room. Emily started, turning around. Mark came out of the bedroom, apparently having heard the announcer's last words about the methodical man. "About that killer again?" he asked casually, heading to the kitchen. "Isn't it scary to watch this alone?" Emily hastily turned off the TV. "Just news. Creepy, of course." She tried to speak evenly, but her voice failed her. Mark, returning from the kitchen with a cup of coffee, looked at her intently. "You're pale. Did it scare you that much?" Emily looked away. "Of course it's scary. There's a psycho running around the city. Such details. BRRR. Mark sat down next to her and unexpectedly took her hand. Emily froze, not expecting the gesture of closeness. He said softly, "You have nothing to fear. It won't affect you." She looked up at him. It was the first time in a long time that he had called her Em so affectionately. There was calm and confidence in his eyes. For some reason, these words made her feel even more uneasy. Was he trying to calm her down, or did it sound almost like a threat? No, no. Nonsense. "Of course," she smiled. "Just nerves. All this press is building up." Mark tilted his head slightly, continuing to hold her palm. "You're a faithful wife, my beloved," he said quietly. "The maniacs won't touch you." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. Her heart sank. She tried to pull her hand away, but Mark held her gently but firmly. Panic pulsed in her chest. What did he mean? Did he know? Or was he just trying to calm her down? Of course," she muttered, at a loss for words. He smiled, warmly and calmly. "You see." Then he released her hand and stood up. I have to go to work. Emily watched him go, trying to pull herself together. Mark, as if nothing had happened, kissed her forehead goodbye and headed for the door. When the door closed behind him, she finally exhaled, realizing she had been holding it the entire time. Her hand shook with tension where he held it. Paranoia, she told herself. Just paranoia. Mark knew nothing and certainly couldn't be this monster. He was just trying to comfort her. She had to pull herself together. And yet Emily spent the rest of the day walking around the house, flinching at every rustle. She kept seeing the crimson letter A everywhere. A week after the media hype, life seemed to be returning to normal. There were no new attacks, no new news about the maniac with the letter A, and the city, albeit tensely, moved on. Detectives were running off their feet looking for clues, but the killer seemed to have disappeared. Mark knew. The time for the final act of his personal drama was approaching. He methodically played out the games with his main figures, his wife and his friend. Emily still suspected nothing and now tried to be a model wife, apparently partly out of guilt, partly out of fear. Jason, too, was calm, but after his and Emily's decision to wait, he was clearly tormented. Mark noticed this. His friend was nervous, periodically trying to start conversations about how difficult it was for him to hide his feelings, how confused he was. Mark only nodded sympathetically and gave general advice, devoured by sarcasm inside. Finally, Mark decided it was time to close this gestalt. Jason had to get his. He chose a Saturday night. Emily was working at a club after a break from performing due to stress. She went on stage again, assuring her husband that she was distracted. Mark encouraged her, saying that he would have gone to support her himself, but he was very tired. In fact, the absence of his wife gave him freedom of action. At 8 p.m., he called Jason. "Hi, buddy. Listen, could you help me out? I have an urgent matter here. I need to go out of town, pick up something from a friend, and the car is acting up. I'm afraid to drag myself far." Mark's voice sounded normal, but excited not too much, but just enough so that Jason wouldn't suspect something was wrong. "Sure, Mark, no problem," he responded immediately. "Do you need a lift or what?" "Yes, better on yours, otherwise you never know what might happen to mine," Mark played. "It's not far, about 40 minutes towards the canyons. We'll pick up a box of medical equipment. I'll need it at work, otherwise we can't organize delivery." Jason, always ready to help his best friend, agreed. At 8:30, he pulled up to Mark's house in his SUV. Mark was already waiting outside, dressed in comfortable jeans, a jacket, and gloves the cool evening justified wearing them. Under his jacket, on his belt, was the same folding knife, and in his inside pocket was a thin string, a new addition to the arsenal, surgical wire that he had grabbed from the clinic. It was convenient and quiet for strangling, if necessary. "So, shall we go?" Jason asked cheerfully as Mark settled into the passenger seat. "I hope I don't have to crawl under the car. I'm in a suit after all." He was wearing a casual jacket and trousers apparently. He had caught him after work. Mark leaned back. "I think it will be okay. Thanks for helping out." Jason waved his hand. "Oh, come on, I'm glad to help. By the way, it's been a while since we've gone for a ride. I'm always busy." He pulled away, turning onto the highway. He turned on the radio. Soft rock music began to play. Mark noticed his friend cast a quick glance at him. "How are you? Is everything okay? You've been kind of distant lately." "No, everything's fine." Mark gave a tired smile. "I've been swamped with work, you know." "I see. And this whole thing with the killer." BRRRR, Jason winced. "By the way, Emmy said she was very worried." "It happened," Mark answered as calmly as possible. "It's better now." Jason nodded as he drove up the winding road into the foothills of Santa Monica. "Good. She's so impressionable." Mark clenched his jaw but said nothing, not pursuing the topic. They were silent for a few minutes, listening to the music. The city lights were left behind. It was dark all around. The road was surrounded on both sides by wastelands and rare groups of trees. Ahead, on a hill, the lights of rare mansions behind high fences where visible rich neighbors were hiding behind massive gates. But right here, between these estates, there was a poorly lit area, practically deaf. Mark had studied the area well in advance, choosing a spot where the mobile signal was weak and the chances of random witnesses were minimal. "Turn right here," he asked, as an old exit road loomed ahead. "A friend said he'd meet you near an abandoned gas station." In the darkness, the outline of an old gas station and canopy, long since out of service, was indeed visible. The place looked abandoned. Jason slowed down. Here, what a strange choice of place. "He's probably a little afraid," Mark shrugged. "He got this thing illegally, so he asked for it in private." Jason chuckled knowingly. "Okay, secrecy." He pulled the SUV into the parking lot in front of an old gas station. There was no one around. A single highway light flickered through the trees in the distance, but the light barely reached here. They got out of the car. Mark pretended to look around. "I can't see him," he muttered. Jason took out his phone. "Try calling a friend." Right now, Mark stepped slightly to the side, pretending to search for a network on his phone. Then he turned around. "Damn, it doesn't work." Jason frowned and looked at his watch. "This is all strange. Maybe he's late, or maybe we came to the wrong place." Mark stood behind his friend, looking at the back of his head. This was the moment. His heart began to pound loudly, but his hand was steady. He quietly pulled a thin wire from under his jacket, two ends with wooden handles, a sling for a garrote. "Just throw it on, and no sound will come out." "I'll check the coordinates now," he said out loud, taking a step closer. Jason was about to reply, but a sudden tug on the wire that was tightening around his neck cut off his words. Mark jerked the garrote toward himself, digging his knee into his friend's back. Jason wheezed, his legs buckling in shock. The phone fell from his hand onto the cracked asphalt. "Mark?" he wheezed in a hoarse, strangled voice, trying to grab the wire that was constricting his neck. Mark was silent, clenching his teeth, and pulled even harder. Jason struggled, instinctively trying to throw off the noose. He was stronger than he looked. In a convulsive struggle, he managed to push his elbow into Mark's side. Mark growled with the effort, but did not let go of the wire. For several agonizing seconds, Jason gurgled, clawing at his throat, but the wire had already penetrated deep into his skin, blocking his arteries. His body weakened, his movements slowed. Mark felt the resistance fading and loosened his grip. Jason fell to his knees, gasping for air, his face darkening. He was still alive, though half strangled. The wire cut in, but did not cut through. Mark let go too soon, realizing he wanted to look into his friend's eyes in his final moments. He roughly turned Jason around. He staggered, clutching the bleeding stripe on his neck, his eyes wide with confusion and horror. "Mark, what?" He barely managed to say, coughing. "Surprised?" Mark asked coldly, throwing the bloody wire to the ground and pulling a folding knife out of his pocket. The blade gleamed in the dim light. "Didn't think I knew everything?" Jason sobbed, falling back on his knees. What are you? You think the Punisher maniac is someone else?" Mark leaned down, grabbing his friend by the hair and forcing him to lift his head. "No, Jay. He's closer than you thought." "Oh, God, no." Jason breathed out, finally understanding. "Is this you?" His eyes reflected undisguised horror. Mark smiled wryly. "Surprise." Jason's whole body shook. "Mark, brother, forgive me. Please. This is all a mistake." "Brother," Mark growled, feeling his blood boil. "Don't you dare call me brother. You're not my brother anymore. You're nothing to me." Mark pushed Jason away, and he fell backwards, weakly propping himself up with his elbows. "I didn't mean to offend you," he muttered quickly. "It just happened. By itself. We didn't plan it, I swear." "Shut up." Mark's voice was chilling. He placed his boot on his former friend's chest, pinning him to the ground. "You stole my wife, my love, my trust. You crossed it all out," Jason cried. "I am ready to atone, as you say. The police, they will put me in jail. I will disappear. Just let me live." In response, Mark eased the pressure of his boot slightly and crouched down next to him, running the blade of the knife across Jason's cheek. Jason froze, feeling the sharp blade against his skin. Live? Mark shook his head. Like Richard Hill or Elizabeth Harper. Jason's eyes darted around, realizing that Mark was listing the victims of the maniac on the news. He breathlessly whispered, "So it's all true. It really is you. Why?" "For justice," he answered quietly. "They violated a sacred thing, the trust of loved ones. They destroyed families, just like you." Jason trembled. "I don't have a family. I—" "Sarah," Mark prompted with a wry smile. "Isn't this your future family, huh? Didn't you betray her too?" Jason shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "We are not married. That's different." "It doesn't matter." Mark's voice became harsh. "You betrayed everything you could, both friendship and love. There is punishment for this." He took the knife from Jason's cheek and raised it over his chest. Jason screamed shrilly. "No, help." But Mark, having gained freedom of movement, struck with lightning speed. The blade entered precisely between the ribs on the left, piercing the lung. The scream was cut off by a gurgling cough. Jason arched in agony, blood bubbling on his lips. "H-H-H," Mark whispered, pressing his friend's shoulders to the ground. "Quiet, quiet, it's fast." Jason was gasping for air, his eyes bulging. Mark pulled out the knife and stabbed him again, this time into the heart. Jason's body jerked, then went limp. Blood poured onto his shirt in a dark stain. Mark breathed heavily, looking into the fading eyes of his former friend. There was so much pain in them, pleading, and in the last seconds an understanding of his own guilt. Maybe he wanted to say something. His lips moved, releasing bloody foam. Mark leaned closer, looking coldly into those eyes. "Goodbye, Jay." Jason Phillips took a sharp breath and froze, staring up at the starry sky. Mark rose slowly. His hands were covered in blood up to the elbows. There were splashes on his face. His heart was pounding loudly in his chest. It was all over. But no, that's not all. He remembered the symbol. Unbuttoning Jason's shirt with trembling fingers, Mark carefully cut the letter A into his chest. This time, large and clear, unmistakable. When he finished, he looked around. There was silence all around. Only the wind rustled in the dry bushes. In the distance, on the highway, the headlights of a car flashed by without stopping. Mark stole Jason's gold wedding ring from his body. He had been wearing it since their engagement. Mark threw the ring on the ground and crushed it with his heel. Then he picked up Jason's phone from the asphalt. The screen was cracked, but the device still worked. Mark's bloody fingerprints would have left traces, but it didn't matter. The police would know that the victim knew him anyway. He decided to frame the case as another maniac case. Fortunately, the style was the same, which meant he needed to remove personal motives. He dragged Jason's body to the car and sat him in the driver's seat. He leaned the seat back so it looked like he was dozing off. He threw the phone on the seat next to him. He walked around, trying not to step in the pools of blood. He took off his bloody gloves. It was good that he had put them on earlier and put them in his pocket. In Jason's car, he had a small travel backpack. He had secretly put it in earlier, and in it was a change of clothes, water, towels. He quickly wiped his hands and face, changed his jacket for a clean sweatshirt. One last look at the abandoned gas station. Jason was sitting dead in the headlights, his chest ripped open, revealing his red A brand. Let the cops puzzle over it. Mark got into his car. He had prudently parked it behind the gas station before the meeting and started the engine. Time to go home to his wife to finish the final part of the tragedy. As he drove along the night highway, he thought about how he hadn't felt the satisfaction he expected. When the blade pierced Jason's heart, revenge had been accomplished, but it hadn't brought joy. There was only coldness inside. His friend's execution had felt not like an act of justice, but like some kind of dull duty. Perhaps because there was still one unclosed page left. Emily. He hadn't yet decided her fate. Let's see what she does, he thought, gripping the steering wheel. Maybe seeing Jason dead on the news screen would teach her a lesson, or maybe she would ask for redemption herself. In any case, the play was drawing to a close. The last act lay ahead. The next morning, the city was once again shaken. All the news reported a new murder by the slayer. The mutilated body of a well-known lawyer, Jason Phillips, had been found that night. The car with his body was found at an abandoned gas station on Canyon Drive. The letter A was clearly carved into the dead man's chest. The press was buzzing even louder. The maniac had become even more brazen, and a respected member of society had fallen victim. Now no one could feel safe. Emily learned of the incident when she was returning home from a night shift at a club. She heard on the taxi radio, "Police confirm victim is Jason F., 35, attorney. Unofficial sources say the victim was engaged to be married, which would fit the killer's motive of punishing infidels." Emily's world went black. She froze in the back seat, and the radio continued to chatter about a head-slicing serial killer, and the journalists were already competing in names. Jason was dead. Her ears began to ring. As soon as the taxi pulled up outside her house, she threw the money to the driver and ran out. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the door. "I hope Mark isn't home," she thought frantically. She needed to pull herself together before she could talk to him. But Mark was home. He was sitting on the couch in the living room, watching the news. On the screen was a photo of Jason in life, with the caption, "Killed by a serial killer." Emily stumbled into the room, pale as a sheet, her eyes wide and on the verge of tears. "Mark," she wheezed, not feeling her legs. He stood up to meet her, seeming to look worried. "Emily, I just found out." "Oh my God, it's Jason." Hearing his voice, so sincerely grieving, Emily could not bear it. She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "It's my fault," she moaned through her sobs. Mark quickly came up and hugged her. "SHH, my dear, it's not your fault. He's a madman. He chooses his victims at random." Emily shook her head against his chest. "No, it's not by chance." She pulled away, looking into his face through tears. "I have to tell you something." "Oh, Mark." She went weak in his arms, and he sat her down on the sofa. He sat down next to her, still hugging her shoulders. "Quiet. I'm here. What happened?" Emily wiped her wet cheeks with a trembling hand. The moment of truth had come. She could no longer bear this lie. All her fears, premonitions, all came true in the most terrible way. Jason was dead, and the feeling of guilt was off the charts. "Mark, listen." She began slowly, choking on tears. "Jason, he..." She closed her eyes, then blurted out, "We had an affair. Forgive me. I don't know how I could. It's my fault. If it weren't for me, he would be alive." The confession hung in the air. Emily, sobbing, looked at her husband, and Mark looked at her unexpectedly calmly. There was not a drop of surprise in his eyes, only a strange, disturbing understanding. "Did you hear me?" she whispered. "I cheated on you with Jason." Mark nodded slightly. "I heard." Emily covered her face with her hands, expecting a scream, anger, anything. But the silence stretched on. She took her hands away and met his gaze. It was terrifying, too calm. "You're not angry?" she asked timidly. "I'm angry," he answered quietly, "but I'm not surprised." Emily's throat went dry. Her heart started pounding. "What? What do you want to say?" Mark stood up. His face became cold, his features sharpened into a marble mask. "I've known about this for a long time, Emily." She froze. The words seemed to hit her. "Do you know?" "How long ago?" "Quite a long time ago." He began to slowly pace the room, as if passing judgment. "I saw you then in his apartment, and I found your correspondence." Emily gasped, remembering the day she lost her phone. "So, he was reading. He knew all along and kept quiet." "Mark," she stammered. "Why? Didn't you say anything?" He chuckled briefly. "Tell me, so that you both apologize, repent." "How touching." Emily felt a growing sense of dread. She stood up from the couch, backing away. "Forgive me. I have nothing to say in my defense. I don't deserve forgiveness. Mark stopped, looking down at her. True, you don't deserve it. Emily noticed that beneath her husband's benevolent facade, hatred was seething. His eyes flashed in a way that sent shivers down her spine. You, that's why you're so calm, she asked barely audibly. You wanted revenge? Revenge. He shook his head. That's too simple a word for what I've been doing these past weeks. Emily's throat tightened. Mark, what are you saying? He tilted his head, as if wondering at her misunderstanding. Do you think this maniac killed Jason by accident? Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart sank. She pressed her palm to her lips, looking at her husband with wide eyes. No, no, it can't be. Maybe, he confirmed softly, taking a step towards her. She recoiled, hitting her back against the wall. All the strange things flashed through her mind. His words, a faithful wife has nothing to fear, his cold calm, as if he was ready for this day. It's you. She breathed out. Good God, Mark, what have you done? Mark stopped a couple of steps away from her. Now there was no pretense left on his face, only painful triumph. What I had to do. I cleansed our circle of lies. And not only ours, I taught many others a lesson. Emily sobbed. Her knees buckled. She held her hands out in front of her, pleading. Please, no. I love you, no matter what. Don't kill me. Mark chuckled. Do you love me? It's funny to hear it now. He came close. Emily closed her eyes, thinking he was going to hit her. But he only ran his finger down her cheek, wiping away a tear. The touch made her shudder. It was icy. I thought for a long time what to do with you, he whispered. Kill you right away or give you a chance. Now I see. You repent. Do you think that will be enough? Emily cried. Mark, I beg you, I will do whatever you say. Just have mercy. Mark was silent for a few seconds, staring at her. Then he nodded to himself. That's all I can say. She nodded vigorously, grasping at any hope. Yes, yes, I promise. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the front door from outside, then a voice. Police, Mark Warren, are you home? Open up, I'm talking. They both shuddered. Emily looked at her husband in fear. Mark narrowed his eyes angrily. Bastards, quickly. The knock was repeated. Mark stepped out of the living room into the corridor. Right now, 1 minute. He turned to Emily and whispered, Wipe away your tears. Sit down. Nothing extra. She nodded jerkily, trying to get a hold of herself. Mark ran his hand over his face, adopting a neutral expression, and opened the door. Detective Riley and 2 other officers stood in the doorway. Riley held his badge at the ready. Dr. Warren, hello. Sorry for the early call. We need to ask you a few questions. Of course, Mark invited them inside, feigning bewilderment. What's the matter? Riley looked at him with a sharp gaze. Your friend, Jason Phillips, was killed tonight. Mark feigned shock. Yes, I found out. Horrible. When did you last see him? The detective asked bluntly. Mark tensed up slightly, but kept his voice. 3 days ago, we had lunch together. Riley nodded. And yesterday evening, did you contact me? No, Mark shook his head. I was at home. Can you confirm? The second officer interjected. Mark shrugged. A wife can. Emily. Emily stood up, trying to look collected. Yes? Riley glanced at her. Were you at home with your husband last night? She froze, feeling the cold sweat. Of course Mark wasn't home, he was killing Jason. But if she told the truth, that she was at the club and he was out of sight. She met her husband's gaze a warning, but also a plea. He trusted her with his fate now. Just now he was on the verge of killing her, and now he depended on her word. In a second, Emily's mind raced through everything. The fear, the loss, the guilt, the love she still felt for this broken man. Whatever monster was inside him, it was born from her betrayal. In a way, she felt complicit, and maybe she deserved the same fate that befell Jason. Emily swallowed hard and said firmly, Yes, Mark was at home all evening. The detective raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? You weren't here. I think you work at night. I had a day off yesterday, she lied without flinching. Riley stared, then nodded. Good. Doctor, one more question. Did you suspect anything about your wife's affair with the late Phillips? Mark pretended to be stunned. Romaine, he turned to Emily, feigning shock brilliantly. Is that... really? Emily looked down, feigning remorse. Yes, we were going to tell you. Riley chuckled. I see. So you found out today? Yes, Mark grabbed his head with his hands. God. The detective watched carefully. Then he said, Can I inspect your car? Why? Mark frowned. Although, examine it if necessary. The officers looked at each other. One went outside. Riley continued his interrogation. Where do you keep your medical instruments? Could someone have taken a scalpel? Mark threw up his hands. Scalpels at work, under report. Not at home. Do you want to search? Riley narrowed his eyes. Perhaps. You understand, you fit the profile. Then the officer who had left returned. He whispered something to Riley. He frowned even more. Doctor, was your wife telling the truth? Your car is cold. The engine has clearly not been started for a long time. Emily intervened quietly. He really didn't go anywhere. Riley shook his head. It's strange. Your friend called you the day before yesterday at 20:32, and the signal was cut off not far from the murder scene. Beeline mobiles are a great thing. Mark tensed internally. Riley suddenly stepped closer. I think, Doctor, that you are our maniac. You had the motive, the skills, and the opportunity. Nonsense. Mark flared up, trying to make his voice sound indignant. I'm a surgeon. I save lives. I don't take them. Yes, I'm angry at them. They betrayed me, but to kill, that's madness. We'll talk at the station, Riley said decisively and nodded to his colleagues. Two officers approached, taking out handcuffs. Mark Warren, you are under arrest on suspicion of. No, Emily screamed. And it all happened in an instant. The officer grabbed Mark by the arm, twisting it. Mark jerked, resisting. Emily, without thinking, grabbed a heavy ceramic mug from the table, the same one Mark had been drinking coffee from when she confessed, and hit the nearest police officer in the head with all her might. The blow knocked him unconscious. The second officer raised his hand to his holster. Stand, but Mark, having gained freedom of movement, instantly snatched a scalpel from his belt. He had foreseen that they might come and slashed the officer across the throat. He dropped the pistol, clutching at the blood, and fell, choking. Riley pulled back, drawing his weapon. But Emily was already in a rage, grabbing the second officer's dropped pistol and pointing it at the detective. Don't move. Riley froze, dumbfounded by the turn of events. Before him stood a husband and wife, covered in blood. Mark, holding a scalpel, Emily, with trembling hands, holding a gun. I see, he croaked. You are together. Mark looked at his wife. Emily was shaking all over, but her fingers were tightly gripping the trigger. Their eyes met, and suddenly a single understanding flashed in them. Mark said quietly, Amy, are you sure? Emily bit her lip but nodded. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was firm. We've gone too far, my love. Mark smiled slightly, a genuine smile, warm and wildly proud. He turned to the detective. Alas, detective, you were only partly right. There is not one maniac here, but two, and it is time for you to go. Riley tried to raise his gun, but Emily fired first. The sound shook the room. The detective staggered, clutching his wounded chest, and fell backwards against the body of his partner. Emily stared at the gun in her hand, stunned. She had just killed a man. For Mark, a myriad of emotions raced through her chest. Horror, relief, desperate determination. Mark stepped toward her, carefully took the gun from her fingers, and threw it away. Then he held his wife tightly to him. She burst into tears against his chest, now from shock, from adrenaline, and, strangely, from incredible unity. This, she sobbed, everything. It's HHH, he whispered, stroking her hair. We're together now, do you hear? I won't leave you. Emily raised her face, looking into his eyes pleadingly. Have you forgiven me? Mark ran his thumb across her cheek, wiping away the blood stain left by the splash. You have proven your love. The word stuck. He realized that he was no longer alone in this darkness. She was with him. In madness, in sin, but with him. And for the first time in a long time, a semblance of happiness gleamed in his eyes. The police sirens wailed in the distance. The neighbors were probably alarmed by the shot. They had to hurry. Mark quickly came to his senses. We need to leave. Now. Emily nodded, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. Together, they rushed to get ready. Mark grabbed the money and documents he had hidden earlier. Emily grabbed the bare necessities. Before leaving, Mark paused for a moment, looking around the apartment. Years of their love and lies had passed here. Now behind them was a bloody mess, torn lives. Emily touched his hand, bringing him out of his reverie. He put his arm around her waist, and they crossed the threshold together, closing the door behind them forever. Night was falling over Los Angeles as Mark drove the car out of town on the highway. Emily sat next to him, her arm tightly entwined with his. The radio was once again discussing the serial killer's nightmare, but Mark turned the volume down. He didn't need the voices of strangers anymore. "Where are we going now?" Emily asked quietly after a long silence. Mark thought for a second and replied, "Further away from here. Let's start from the beginning, where no one knows us." She laid her head on his shoulder, trustingly and submissively. "I am with you, wherever you are." He kissed her hair as he walked. Together, always. Behind them was the city of angels, shining with lights, which they had turned into a city of sin and blood. Ahead of them lay the unknown, the life of fugitives, or the illusory freedom. But they were together, like two inseparable accomplices, bound by vice and love. The night swallowed the running car, and above the road, showing them the way, glowed the red, bloody letters of the neon advertisement, like an indelible mark of their common fate. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.